Imagine a large, chubby gentleman in a suit smoking a pipe. And picture him. Now, if you're anything like me, the picture in your mind is pretty cool. I don't know what it is, but a suited guy who's got a bit of extra fluff to him with a big old pipe is about as suave as humans get, in my mind. Now, if you're not the same as me, that's fine. I actually feel kind of bad for you, because the joy I get from looking at guys like this is unmatched. Anyways, I have a point to all this. If you Google the words I told you to picture, the pictures are far less flattering. I mean, far less flattering. It's clear that the internet, and very possibly society as a whole, has some sort of prejudice against bigger folk. But today, we're traveling back to a time where this was very different. Today, we're talking about fat men's clubs. And real quick, I say the word fat like 100 times in this video. It's not an insult. I've been a fat guy. I've got some meat on my bones. No shame. Love fat people. These folk identified themselves as fat, and I'm going along with their identification. Glory to Chub. One night in 1903, a man by the name of Jerome Hale, the owner of a New England tavern, was sitting around a fireplace with several regular guests at his tavern when he noticed that all of them were over 200 pounds. Naturally, he proposed that they start the New England Fat Men's Club. They decided on a motto: I've got to be good-natured, I can't fight, and I can't win. This club was not the first of its kind, however. There were several more just like it across the United States and one in France. There was just one rule for the clubs. You had to be over 200 pounds to join. Now, you may be thinking, hey, 200 pounds isn't that big, and I agree with you. I was a bit over 2 stacks when I was like 15. Granted, I was definitely on the chubbier side, but I was also 15, so it's crazy that I was eligible for this club for grown men. However, this club was made at a time when food was not nearly as accessible as it is today in America. Becoming fat was nearly a struggle in and of itself, and it usually required an excess of money. And so, these clubs were used as networking opportunities. Fat men's clubs were filled with powerful, influential people. Business owners, railroad managers, presidential candidates, you name it. If you wanted to make a name for yourself, a damn good way was to pick up a fork. William Howard Taft even attended a meeting at a max weight of 350 pounds, but declined membership within any groups. Now, the meetings weren't solely composed of larger gentlemen just talking to each other for hours on end. They started with a ceremonious weigh-in. Now, this was at a time where scales were not nearly as common as they are now. No one really just had one in their bathroom. So, for most folk, this was the only time they would get to see their own weight. People would stuff rocks in their pockets and pillows in their suits in order to seem more fat and thus more dignified. Even though they were fun, these weigh-ins were also very important. They were often used as a way to elect officials for the club. The heavier you were, the more likely you were to be the president. One day in 1884, a man named Philetus Dorlin, an owner of a giant clam business and president of the Connecticut Fat Men's Club, was about to weigh in. Everyone had been waiting for his weight all day because he was an absolutely giant dude. The New York Times wrote, "His obesity borders on the infinite. The most hardened, lean man cannot gaze upon his magnificent proportions without unconsciously being made purer and holier." Philetus stepped upon the scale, and his weight was announced at 340 pounds. He stepped off the scale, looked at the golden scepter where the weights of former presidents had been written, and began to cry. He cried and apologized to the club because he was not nearly as fat as the men who came before him, men who came in at 415, 489, even 549 pounds. He said that there were other, fatter men more worthy than he to sit in the president's chair, and that he would not selfishly stand between the club and glory with his insignificant 340 pounds. Shortly after, he was re-elected to be president in an entirely unanimous vote. There was more to the clubs than the weigh-ins alone, however. Some clubs had athletic events, mainly for comedy above actual competition. They quickly abandoned pole vaulting as they had trouble finding a pole that was sturdy enough to hold their members. They had to use a chain for tug-of-war because the rope always broke. There were also a ton of sports teams where only fat men were allowed to join. There were bicycling clubs, basketball teams, but the most common was baseball. One day in 1885, the Brooklyn Fat Men's baseball team was slated to face off against the Flushing Fat Men's Club. Their 9-person team weighed in at over a ton, and they began to prepare for the match. The national media was here, and hundreds upon hundreds of spectators. Eventually, after preparing for the game to begin, and after one player paid a boy 25 cents to help put his uniform on, Brooklyn's team noticed something. The Flushing Fat Men's Club was nowhere to be found. All they saw was the captain of the Flushing team looking over the fence at them in shock. The Flushing team had retreated and abandoned the match because of just how rotund the opposing team was. This pissed Brooklyn off, as well as all the spectators, so, according to the history books, they all just got drunk. On a beautiful 1920 day in Texas, the Weatherford and Mineral Wells baseball teams decided to face off against each other as well. This time, there was actually a match. Both teams appeared as promised and played a good old-fashioned game of baseball. There was some drama when Mineral Wells claimed that Weatherford's catcher wasn't fat enough, but they managed to settle it fairly quickly. There were also several sideline fights among the men, enough so that they had to plant moderators around the field. In the end, Weatherford won the game, but Wells maintained that they would have won the game if it was on their home turf because they couldn't find an automobile strong enough to transport the real fat men of Mineral Wells. Which, what a fucking excuse for losing a game. Those aren't even our real fat guys, just count. And of course, believe it or not, there were their near mythological eating competitions. This wasn't where eating contests began, but I definitely think this may be what helped popularize them. Thousands of oysters, hundreds of pounds of steak, anything you could think of would be brought to these contests. The all-time best eater of the Fat Men's Club was Frank Dotzler, who ate 11 cups of coffee, 12 rolls, 3 pies, 8 pounds of steak, and 275 oysters, which comes out to a whopping 21,000 calories, something that would make Joey Chestnut make a run for his money. The Fat Men's Club were filled with people with incredibly influential jobs, and within the clubs, the men had a deep sense of camaraderie. There were social clubs at their core, and the men felt as if their shared weight made them brothers, just as deep as blood. This brotherhood led many to betray their jobs for the club. There was one time where the police suspected a Fat Men's Club of selling liquor during Prohibition, so they went to shut down the operation. However, when they did, they found many of their own officers drinking with their fellow fat men. However, in the early 20th century, more and more research began to come out about the risks of obesity, and some people decided that it just wasn't the right lifestyle for them. So, unfortunately, the Fat Men's Club started to die down. In 1924, the New England Fat Men's Club, which once stood at a whopping 10,000 members, only managed to reunite 38 at a meeting, none of whom met the weight requirement. And as a result, it was tragically disbanded. Now, obviously, back then, fat people were regarded fairly differently than they are today. It's true that to a certain extent they were mocked, much like today, but they were also widely respected. To have the amount of mass that these men had symbolized that they were hard workers and held powerful jobs. Everyone saw fat men as jolly people, funny people, people you would want to be around. One magazine praised fat men, saying that they are the most jolly and convivial of the male species and the most considerate of and charitable to others. Also, apparently, it's a fact that 7 out of 10 fat men make excellent husbands. I'd love to know whose ass they pulled that statistic out of, but now, of course, things are different. And it kinda sucks. Athletes are all skinny and under 200 pounds, and it's lame. That's why I tune into IPF Worlds each year to watch my glorious king Jesus Oliveira smoke the competition with his mass. And I'm not saying that bigger folk are more fun to root for in sports, but if you haven't watched any lineman touchdown compilations, don't you dare argue with me.